explain what scenography is and what inspired you to take that career course?
Briefly, no, I cannot do that. But
What you can
I'll tell
manage.
you. I'll tell you some stuff. So scenography, like I said, is designing. I'll tell you what I tell students is that scenography, whether it's scenery, costumes, lighting, sound, is designing environments for characters to inhabit, and so it's important for them to describe, to both illustrate the environment and comment on the action of the play or the message of the play. So that's kind of maybe that's a high level of what a stenographer does, but the simple story is I design scenery and lighting, sometimes costumes for stage plays mostly. I actually got into it completely by accident. I started as an actor. Um, it's quite a long story, so I'm trying to hit the highlights. But essentially, I dropped out of school, out of college for about 6 or 7 years, and went back to with the intention to open my own theater. And I realized how much I didn't know about the theater. So when I went back to school, I dropped theater. I didn't do theater for like 6 or 7 years. When I went back, I wanted to learn as much as I could about every part of theater. So I was going to take as many classes as I could. And one of the first classes that I ended up taking my first year was a scenic design course. First, I had an intro to design course, and then scenic design. And as a kid, I was always pretty good at drawing. I loved drawing, I loved painting, that sort of thing. And then I kind of gave it up, like, I didn't do it, but I was always pretty good at it. So when I got to that scenic design class, I kind of had a natural ability. And I was always into architecture. I used to draw ground plans of my dream house or a restaurant or whatever. So when I got to that class, I understood space. I understood communicating the idea, and I was a good drawer. So everyone thought that I was there to be a scenic designer. So they started asking me to design their shows, student shows. They say, "Hey, will you design for me?" And I enjoyed it, and so that ended up being my path.
What are the challenges that you have met, and why do you think most people most artists are discouraged from taking on the discipline?
That's a good question about all artists in general. Um, One of the challenges is the work and what it pays, the availability of the work. No, not everybody does what I do, but a lot of people do what I do, and we're all trying to get the same jobs. So that's difficult. I am a professor, as I mentioned. Most of the designers working in the United States, certainly that I know, are professors, and that's because it's a steady paycheck. So when you don't have a show to work on, you still have money coming in. Now, for me, I always describe myself as an artist who teaches. Some people do the other way around. Some people are teachers, professors first, and they are able to teach this. I consider myself an artist first, but I also consider myself a really good teacher, and I love teaching. I think I'm a better teacher than I am a designer. So I think I meandered off your path there, but so the challenges are time. That's another one. Time is a big one, especially because I am a professor. Like being able to do outside work, designing outside of my university, is a challenge. Yeah.
Do you think someone can be a self-taught snowboarder? Because someone listening to you right now might think, okay, I need to be really educated, I need to be a professor to be a snowboarder, and a recognized snowboarder. Here in Uganda, you're not going to find so many places. Actually, I encountered them, I think, maybe just one or two, where snowboarding is taught. It's mainly acting, it's mainly writing, but for the person who wants to be self-taught, can they do that, and what advice would you give to such a person?
So the simple answer is yes. I think so. I don't think everyone is necessarily naturally good about it, or good at it rather. It certainly helps to have a mentor or somebody to help guide you you may need to know. Um, but ultimately, it doesn't need to be done in a certain way. We, in the United States and other countries where sonography is taught frequently, there tends to be a system, and it tends to make people think, okay, I have to do this. And part of this workshop that we started today is about you don't have to do it in a certain way, but there are certain things you need to serve. You need to serve the story. You need to communicate to the audience and hopefully comment on the story. And those are the kind of things that anybody can do. And then how do you get there? What do you put on stage? I think that can be self-taught. My advice, if somebody wants to do this, if there's genuinely somebody watching this who's like, I want to do this, email me. My experience is that most designers, most scenographers, most theater artists are eager to share their knowledge. And I we have a scenographer here in our group, and he had a question. I'm like, let's talk about other stuff. Let's talk about all kinds of things. Let's just meet, because I'm happy to do that. And maybe that's part of me as a teacher. I'm naturally doing that, but there are people in the world that are willing to give their advice and expertise and willing to do it for free. An email, a Zoom call, or whatever. I am a member of OISTAT, which stands for, it's in French, so it's the International Organization for Scenographers, Theater Architects, and Technicians. And it's a bunch of countries have centers within OISTAT. And if somebody contacts OISTAT and says, hey, I am in Uganda, I want to do more of this, who can you put me in touch with? They know us. And if I don't know somebody, or if I can't do it, I can give you somebody else that I know, or I can pass you to somebody who I think might know, or whatever. So ask.
You talked about the workshop. Found objects. Tell us more about that. Quite an intriguing name for a workshop.
Well, the original name for the workshop, and the workshop is not mine to begin with.
Why found objects?
Well, because anyone can find them. So I don't know that I even necessarily named the workshop as much as gave a description, and the festival chose found objects, which is appropriate. The workshop originally started as a workshop called mistura, which is a Spanish word and means mixture, basically. A bunch of things coming together to make a whole thing. And it was started by a good friend of mine named Soledad Sanchez. She did it in combination with another designer, Ellen Meisner, and it was created for World Stage Design, which is a every 4-year exposition of theater. It started with an OISTAT group that at the time I was the head of, so I was kind of there from the beginning, but I did not create it. And so the beautiful thing about it, the thing I really liked about it, because I actually did the workshop with them, I did a few of them with them, and it's just really creative and a lot of play. There's just a lot of play involved. And the found objects, to circle back around to your question, why the found objects? What is it? It's basically saying, if there's not one way to do something, if I need to convey that I have headphones on, I can grab these cups maybe and do this, and depending on what I do next or what I say, the audience will believe that. And not only is that good for creativity, for interest to an audience, but it's cheap. It can be free because you can use almost anything. In fact, I think that was one of the difficult things for the festival, is getting stuff for me, because they're like, what do you need? And I'm like, stuff. I just need, you cannot bring me enough. You cannot bring me enough stuff, not because we're necessarily going to use it all, but we want the options. So.
Theatre in general is a very collaborative art. How can scenographers effectively collaborate with directors, performers, in that a creator you find or
My favorite collaborations are where I come into the room with an idea, and the director comes into the room with an idea, and when we leave, we have an idea that is better than both of us thought about. And I think to have good collaboration, it helps to be pleasant to work with. I think I am most of the time. It helps to try to shed any ego, to not fall in love with your own work. In other words, let's say you've come in with a design for Romeo and Juliet, and you've got some big vision. We're gonna do it on a ship in a barge in a river, and then you come in and the director's like, well, I don't think it's about that. If you latch on to that too tightly, you're going to have a bad collaboration. And the same is true for the directors. If to me, it is truly a collaboration, and I want the director to talk to me about how they feel about the show, how what's important about the show, or what's important about certain scenes, what message they're trying to send. I love having conversations like that. I like directors to bring me. Sometimes they'll bring me artwork and say, this is not the set, but it feels like this. That's useful. It's useful for color. It's useful for shapes and things like that.
So have you ever been in a situation where technically you know what is right for the production, but the director insists on something that makes it work? How do you deal with that circumstance? And you cannot pull out of the production. You're already halfway deep into the production.
You're putting all the parameters on to make sure I can't wiggle out of the answer. I have been in situations where directors are very prescriptive and know what they want. If I think they have a good reason behind it, I can capitulate to that. If they can explain it to me. I never necessarily think that I'm right, but sometimes there are choices that I want to make that are in conflict with the director. One instance I can think of is I was designing King Lear, and I had this wall, and I wanted the wall to be like patinated copper, like old copper, kind of green, but showing some flashes of what it used to be underneath. And the director was like, no, this doesn't work. And she's actually one of the smartest directors I've ever worked with. But in this case, for some reason, she did not want this, and it was beautiful. And probably the only time that I thought I was right in this case, where I thought, no, this is doing what we're trying to say with the play. It's beautiful, it's interesting, all these things. And for some reason, she just was not on it. And eventually I had to come around, and it was the hill she chose to die on, as they say. And I came around and did something different. Now, fast forward, I don't know, a year later, maybe more, she and I were both in a classroom talking about design and collaboration, I think, in a somebody else's theater classroom. And she brought this up. And we had never talked about it before. And she said, well, the reason I didn't want it is blah, blah, blah. And she said, and I wish I could remember what it was, but she explained it. And I said, oh, I wish you had said that, because that I get. And then I was like, I understand. I still would have loved to have the other thing, but I would have better understood why you did not want it. So I think that has to do with being good to work with, being flexible, because I won lots of other battles as well. I gave her a design gave her a design is not a good term. I offered up a design that was very different for King Lear, and and she was like, oh yeah, okay, this is great. I see where this came from in our conversation. Now, I did go to battle on an opera. I was doing Carmen, and the back wall was this shiny black. I used paper actually to make this crackly wall, and it split apart and had this behind it was this big just shock of red in this crack. And there wasn't much to the set. I was very minimal set. And I did not want that wall to split open until the second act, until at least until after intermission, for a particular reason. I wanted it to happen at a certain point. And both the director and the artistic director, more the artistic director, were like, no, I think we should see this in the beginning. And part of it was because there wasn't much to look at otherwise. It was, it was black. This thing was black, and there was just some little bit of furniture and stuff like that. And I on that one, I did not come down. I did not give in, because I said, listen, I explained my side, and they explained their side. And luckily, finally, they said, okay, if that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. And I don't know how they felt about it in the show once it happened. I would like to think that once you saw the whole production and the back wall cracked apart and there's this big red thing, that they were like, okay, I get it. So, but I don't know. I don't know if we had that conversation.
Okay. That's interesting. So I'm thinking, how much does audience perception play in the choices the cinematographer makes? Because you have traveled, you've seen, I think, different kinds of performances, theater, the way theater is done around the world. How much does the audience contribute to the choices the cinematographer makes?
That's a really good question. I'm not surprised coming from you. So we do it for the audience. If the audience isn't there, we don't have theater. So we have to consider the audience. At the same time, I do believe you can challenge an audience, and audiences are often smarter than we give them credit for. And some of that we explored a little bit in the workshop, where we were using objects that were not the objects they're supposed to be, but we got it. And nobody was like, that's not a saw. Nobody said that, because the audiences don't want to do that. Now, in something I'll talk to my students about is when you're doing research for a show. Say you're doing a show that takes place in a specific point in history, and we've researched it and we found out that something is the case. And so we say, actually, we're not going to do this because it turns out that this is reality, that they wore this costume, or it was this kind of location, or they did have telephones then, or whatever it is. If the audience doesn't know what's real, you have to make a decision. Do I put in there what is accurate, or do I put in what the audience will recognize and identify? Now, there will always be somebody in the audience who's like, I can't believe they did that, because actually, so there's people who know these things. But the audience is always the number one consideration, unless you just want to create full-on art that is pleasing yourself, which I don't think there's anything wrong with. It's just that don't expect the audience to come back necessarily if you don't consider them as well. And I always consider the audience in that. One of my favorite things to do is to surprise an audience. That's one reason I wanted the crack to happen when the crack happened, is I love a surprise. I love doing something with the set that they just don't see coming. And I do that for the audience. I do that because I want them to experience that spectacle, that surprise, and hopefully give them some insight into how we were approaching this play, the themes we were thinking about.
The last question.
Good.
So what advice would you give to young cinographers who feel daunted by the amount of work that scenography demands, and also in terms of experience?
Don't do it. It's a lot of work. So you do theater, you do, if you want to do this for a living, you have to do it because you love it and you don't want to do anything else, because it's not going to pay you well. There's a few people who make a lot of money, because, actors eventually make a lot of money. Some of them, some won't. But if you feel like you've got to create this, if you've got to do this thing, then do it, because I find it to be a highly rewarding profession. It's a highly frustrating profession. It's certainly not a lucrative profession, but it's doing something special. In fact, when I told you I left school, I left theater for 6 or 7 years, and what brought me back was what I was doing at the time. I was a businessman. I was a manager of a cleaning company. And I was like, this just doesn't mean anything. This means nothing to me. Everybody needs their trash emptied. Everyone needs their floors cleaned or whatever. So what? Why am I doing this? Why, it's important work. Somebody's got to do it, but it just didn't mean anything to me. And so I returned to theater. I went back to school and returned to theater. It's a lot of work. So if you don't think you can do a lot of work, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.